Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia here and welcome back to the Overwatch Contenders Roundup. So, there have been a lot of seeding matches going on ahead of the 2020 Season 1 of Overwatch Contenders. Not so long ago we looked at the Chinese seeding tournament, which took place a little bit before everyone else. That is now finished, we took a look at that, but now we have some more to take a look at because some more regions have finished their seeding tournaments. And we can get the results in and we can tell who's going to be in contenders, who's going to be in trials, who's going to be in open division, and so on and so forth. So, the regions that will not be included in this because they haven't yet finished are Europe, South America, and North America. They will be done in different videos. North America is quite a large region, that will probably have its own video. South America and Europe will probably be combined into one video considering they have less teams than the North American region does. But today, we actually have the other three regions to go through. So that means we'll be going through Australia, the Pacific, and Korea, who have all now finished their seedings and we know who is going to be competing where in terms of this first season in 2020. So let's start off in Australia. And entering this, we had Mindfreak, Ground Zero Gaming, Sydney Drop Bears, Warriors Esports, Athletico Esports, and No Weaver. You will notice that there is no order. Order had dominated Australian contenders all the way through 2019 but have now disbanded, leaving the doors open for a new team to go to the forefront of Australian contenders. Although, one word of warning, Ground Zero Gaming have picked up 3 of Order's players, so it looks like Ground Zero Gaming could be the one to beat in Australia right now. So, without further ado, let's get through this seeding tournament. With only 6 teams in it, this is a pretty short one. We start off in the quarterfinals where Mindfreak had a bye. Because there's only 6 teams in it, they couldn't make up the 8 teams that you needed for a full roster of quarterfinals, so Mindfreak got a bye into the semi-finals. Then we had Warriors Esports taking on Athletico Esports. This was a 3-1 win for Warriors Esports and they will progress to the semi-finals of the seeding tournament where they would face Mindfreak. Moving on, we had Ground Zero Gaming. Ground Zero Gaming took the spot of Order and so they received a bye going into the semi-finals, but who would they face? Would it be Sydney Drop Bears or No Weaver? It would be Sydney Drop Bears. Sydney Drop Bears did come 4th in last year's Contenders Season 2, and No Weaver did struggle slightly. It's no surprises here that the Sydney Drop Bears managed to get the win over No Weaver and send them down to the losers bracket. The losers round 1 was pretty simple because both teams received byes because they had no one to face because there were 2 byes in the quarterfinals, so both Athletico Esports and No Weaver went through to the losers round 2. In the semi-finals, we saw Mindfreak taking on Warriors Esports. This was a really close one. I expected Mindfreak to come out on top, but they didn't. Warriors Esports have made some really good signings in the off-season, and this shows with a 3-2 win over Mindfreak. Mindfreak were last year's finalists in Season 2, who went up against Order. So, Mindfreak go down to the losers bracket, Warriors Esports go through to the winners finals. The question is, who would Warriors Esports be facing? Would it be Ground Zero Gaming or Sydney Drop Bears? Now, I did mention that Ground Zero Gaming had taken the place of Order in Australia, and they had taken 3 of their players along with that. So Ground Zero Gaming are a pretty strong team in Australia right now, and it showed here with Ground Zero being able to get the 3-0 victory over Sydney Drop Bears, meaning that the Drop Bears would be dropping down to the losers bracket. Talking of the losers bracket round 2 meant that Sydney Drop Bears was going to take on Athletico Esports. Sydney Drop Bears are clearly the stronger team here and they managed to beat Athletico Esports 3-0. Mindfreak would take on No Weaver. Again, Mindfreak, much the stronger team here, getting the 3-0 win over No Weaver. Then we had losers round 3 where Sydney Drop Bears would take on Mindfreak. This one was a bit of a surprise. If you go on the results from the Season 2 of 2019, you would say Mindfreak would be the better team, but Mindfreak did get outplayed here by Sydney Drop Bears, losing 3-1, meaning that Sydney Drop Bears would progress to the losers final. The question is, who would Sydney Drop Bears be playing? We had to find out with the results of the winners final. This was Warriors Esports taking on Ground Zero Gaming. Now this was a surprise. Warriors Esports dominated this game, getting a 3-0 win over Ground Zero Gaming. Now, honestly, I thought Ground Zero Gaming would be the strongest team in this competition, but being knocked down to the losers bracket was definitely a wake-up call for Ground Zero Gaming. They had to take on Sydney Drop Bears. This was a close one in the losers final, but Ground Zero Gaming did grind out a 3-2 win over the Sydney Drop Bears, meaning they would set up a grand final against, again, yes, Warriors Esports. So, could Ground Zero Gaming get back at Warriors Esports for their big loss in the winners final? Yes, they could. It's a lot a lot closer this time, but Ground Zero Gaming managed to grind out a 3-2 win over Warriors Esports, meaning Ground Zero Gaming will win the seeding tournament for Australian contenders. It doesn't really mean too much, because the top 4 all go through to contenders. So Ground Zero Gaming, Warriors Esports, Sydney Drop Bears and Mindfreak will all go through to the main contenders tournament in Australia. Whereas Atletico Esports and No Weaver, who both lost in the losers round 2, they will be dropping down to contenders trials in Australia this year. Although I would expect with their quality, unless there are some surprising teams in the trials and open division of contenders Australia this year, I would expect Atletico Esports and No Weaver to make it through to contenders anyway. But that is it for Australia. That is the results from the seeding tournaments in Australia. Next, we move on to the Pacific. So the Pacific had more teams in it. This is an 8-team seeding tournament, which means we had no buys. It was comprised of Talon Esports, Global Esports, Far East Society, Mega Esports, Green Leaves, Cyclone Coupling, Xavier Esports and Jupiter. Talon Esports are the dominant force in the Pacific right now. Talon Esports also did very well at the Gauntlet last year, so I was expecting Talon to dominate this. So, talking of Talon, let's start off with the quarterfinals, and they actually got a free win against Jupiter in the quarterfinals because Jupiter did forfeit this tournament, meaning they would also lose their losers round 1 game, but we'll get onto that in a minute. So Jupiter forfeited, meaning Talon Esports would go on to the semi-finals. Who would they be facing? Well, it would be Mega Esports because they managed to beat Green Leaves 3-1. Then we had Global Esports taking on Xavier Esports. Global Esports, if you wanted a fact, Global Esports is the team of Carefree and Water. So there's some actually fairly big names in this Global Esports lineup. They did manage to beat Xavier Esports 3-0, meaning they would move on to the semi-finals. They would be facing Cyclone Coupling as they beat Far East Society 3-1 in the quarterfinals as well. In the losers bracket round 1, I did say that Jupiter had forfeited, and this meant that Green Leaves got a free move on to the losers round 2. And then the second game was Far East Society taking on Xavier Esports. Xavier Esports would be the second casualty of this tournament after Jupiter's forfeit, because they would lose 3-0 to the Far East Society. Far East Society move on to the losers bracket round 2. On to the semi-finals of the winners bracket, and again Talon Esports get a fairly favourable draw here because Mega Esports have to forfeit. So Talon Esports move on to the winners final without actually having played a map. Pretty interesting. Then we had Global Esports taking on Cyclone Coupling. This would be Kefri & Co.'s first loss in the seeding tournament, as they would lose 3-1 to Cyclone Coupling. So the winners final would be Talon Esports taking on Cyclone Coupling. But first of all, let's take a look at the losers bracket. Global Esports would take on Green Leaves in losers round 2. This was a really close game, but Global Esports lost out in the end to Green Leaves 3-2. Green Leaves moving on to the losers bracket round 3. But who would they be facing? Would it be Mega Esports or Far East Society? Mega Esports did partake in this losers bracket round 2, but they didn't have enough to see off Far East Society, as Far East Society would win this one 3-0, setting themselves up a tie against Green Leaves in the losers round 3. Far East Society, though, doing very, very well after their first loss to Cyclone Coupling in the quarterfinals. They would go on to beat Green Leaves 3-0 in the losers bracket round 3, to seal a spot in the losers round finals. But who would they be facing? Would it be Talon Esports or Cyclone Coupling from the winners final? Well, it would be Cyclone Coupling, because Talon Esports finally get to play a game, and Talon Esports win it 3-0, because that's what Talon Esports do in the Pacific. Talon Esports move on to the grand final in convincing fashion. Cyclone Coupling, after a really good run through the winners bracket, would now drop down to the losers final, where they would face Far East Society. Far East Society, remember, played Cyclone Coupling in the quarterfinal of the winners bracket and lost convincingly. This time, the tables were flipped though. Far East Society managed to get a 3-1 win over Cyclone Coupling, knocking them out of the tournament and setting themselves up with a grand final against Talon Esports. The question is, could they take down the might of Talon Esports? No. 3-0 for Talon Esports. As I expected, Talon dominated this tournament. Yes, they got 2 buys in the quarterfinals and semi-finals, but that's sometimes how things fall. But when it came to the winners final against Cyclone Coupling and the grand final against Far East Society, Talon Esports dominated. And that's kind of the way the Pacific is right now. Talon Esports will definitely be my favourites going into this contender season, and it'll be interesting to see if anyone's got the might to take them down. So it's set up like this for the contenders in the Pacific. 1, 2, 3 and 4 will go through to contenders, so that is Talon Esports, Far East Society, Cyclone Coupling and Green Leaves. And then we have the other 3 teams, Global Esports, Mega Esports and Xavier Esports, all dropping down to Contenders Trials in the Pacific for Contenders 2020 Season 1. So that rounds us off for the Pacific, and now we have one last region to look at in this video, and that is Korea. Korea, always a very interesting one to look at, isn't it? So in Korea we had another full roster of 8 teams in this tournament. It would be Runaway, Element Mystique, Gen.G, O2 Blast, GC Busan Wave, T1, which is a replacement for the Fusion University, Meta Athena and World Game Star. So, the quarterfinals would start off as Runaway taking on World Game Star, and this was a shock because Runaway lost 3-1 to World Game Star. Now, if you look at the positions of these teams, actually, that's the top seed knocking out, the bottom seed knocking out the top seed, which is darn massive if you ask me, although it didn't knock out Runaway because Runaway went down to the losers bracket, as we will find out in a minute. Then we had O2 Blast taking on GC Busan Wave. O2 Blast will always be seen as the better team than GC Busan Wave. There's kind of a top 4 in Korea right now. It's made up of Runaway, Element Mystique, Gen.G and O2 Blast. And that kind of shows here with O2 Blast getting a 3-0 win over GC Busan Wave. Gen.G will then take on T1. Can T1 make up for a mediocre first season in Korea last year? No, they are still quite away from being one of the top teams in Korea as they get beaten 3-0 by Gen.G. Gen.G moving on to the semi-finals. Then we had Meta Athena taking on Element Mystique. Element Mystic, one of the top teams in Korea right now, and it shows here with them able to get a 3-0 win over Meta Athena and move on to the semi-finals, Meta Athena dropping to the losers bracket. Talking to the losers bracket, let's start getting through that. Runaway would take on GC Busan Wave, having to recover after a shock loss to World Game Star. That they do, as they would beat GC Busan Wave 3-1. T1 would then take on Meta Athena, and this is where T1 really had to show their class. T1 had to show up here if they wanted to not be known as a perhaps poor team in Korea, and I'm sorry they didn't. They got 3-0'd by Meta Athena, which is not a good look for T1. There is definitely work to do over at the academy team of the Philadelphia Fusion. But moving on to the semi-finals of the winners bracket, we had World Game Star taking on O2 Blast. World Game Star getting a surprise result against Runaway, but could they carry on their surprise results against O2 Blast? No. O2 Blast get a 3-0 win over World Game Star, as you would perhaps expect, and O2 Blast will move on to the winners finals. World Game Star will go down to the losers bracket round 2, where they would face off against, yes again, Runaway. Then we had Gen.G taking on Element Mystic, and this actually was an interesting one. So Element Mystic have been above Gen.G pretty much all of 2019. This is where the tables flipped though. Gen.G able to get a 3-1 win over Element Mystic and move on to the winners finals against O2 Blast. Element Mystic would have to go down to the losers bracket. Talking of the losers bracket round 2 then. World Game Star taking on Runaway. Runaway, could they avoid another shock defeat? Yes they could, getting a 3-1 win and revenge over World Game Star. Still a really good showing for World Game Star though. Getting the win over Runaway is definitely going to put them in good stead to perhaps upset some of the more powerful Korean teams going into Contenders 2020. And then we had Element Mystic taking on Meta Athena. This would be a very close one, but Element Mystic would get the 3-2 win over Meta Athena, knocking Meta Athena out. One thing we did have to clear up though is a 7th place tiebreaker between GC Busan Wave and T1. This was a 3-0 win for GC Busan Wave. Again, T1 really not showing up. They didn't get a single map during this tournament. That's a really poor showing from T1. And then a 5th place tiebreaker between World Game Star and Meta Athena, where Meta Athena would get a 3-1 win over World Game Star. Pretty good look for Meta Athena right now. Definitely one of those forerunners to be chasing the top 4 in Korea right now. But we had losers bracket round 3 to sort out now, and it would be between Runaway and Element Mystic. How many times have we said that in Contenders' career right now? It's always between those two. It's always a tussle between those two. Especially towards the end of 2019, we saw it a lot. But Runaway would be dominant in this one, getting a 3-0 win over Element Mystic. A bit of a surprise. What people probably would have thought as a close game. The problem with Element Mystic right now is they've had to rebuild a lot of their roster, losing it to a lot of Overwatch League teams in the off-season, and it's probably not quite there yet. Yes, Runaway have lost some players, but Runaway have actually replaced a lot of their players, and some of them with previous Overwatch League talent like Flower and Revenge. So Runaway looking pretty good right now. And moving on to the losers final. The winners final though, however, will be between O2 Blast and Gen.G. Who would come out on top here? Two teams that are very good in contenders. O2 Blast though looking darn good, getting a 3-0 win over Gen.G and knocking them down to the losers final where they would face Runaway. O2 Blast going through to the grand final, but who would they be facing out of Gen.G or Runaway? It would be Runaway. Very close game between Runaway and Gen.G in the losers final, but Runaway do grind out a 3-2 win over Gen.G, knocking them out and setting themselves up a tie in the grand final against O2 Blast. We've seen this before as well. It's always been tit for tat between O2 Blast and Runaway throughout the years, but this time it wouldn't be so close, with Runaway running away with it. I'm sorry, I had to do it. 3-0, with O2 Blast failing to pick up a map. Although this isn't the end of the world for O2 Blast, one clear thing is that Runaway have the ability to come back from a shock result. Are Runaway on top right now? They did win Contenders Season 2 2019, but Element Mystic did actually win the Gauntlet. So it's very difficult to work out who is right on top of Korean Contenders right now, but Runaway do win the seeding tournament for Contenders 2020 Season 1. This means that the top 4, Runaway, O2 Blast, Gen.G and Element Mystic, as you would probably not be surprised, will go through to Contenders, and then the 4 teams dropping into Trials will be Danconia, World Game Star, GC Busan Wave, and T1. And if I was T1 right now, I would be slightly worried, because they really didn't show up during the seeding tournament. Failing to get a map is very surprising, because T1 by far weren't but the worst team in Korea last year, so yeah, work to do at T1. But that is it for the seeding tournaments in Korea, the Pacific and Australia. I will be back with the next Contenders Roundup, which will feature either Europe and South America or North America. I don't know which one will come first, but those should be really interesting ones. The North American one is massive. Just to put it in perspective, the North American seeding tournament, I believe, has 12 teams in it. So it's a bit different to the rest of the seeding tournaments we've seen so far. But that is for another day. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next video. See you then.